The Precipice. Written by Hugh Maclennan, narrated by Koehler, published by McGill Queen's University Press. For Dorothy. Preface. Sometimes we wake in the night and know why we have become what we are. Waking alone in the night, listening to the cars rumbling under the pavement of Park Avenue, or the grain boat's foghorn throbbing against the shore of Lake Ontario, or the wail of the through freight on the Nebraska plain, we see in a flash against the eyeballs a fragment of what has happened to us all. And lacking the brave illusion of daylight, it is easy to wish we had been born in another century, or had inherited some other time than now. Were there nights in Egypt when the builders could not sleep? Surely there were nights when they lay on their backs and thought of the long road over the desert of which this was the end, counted the steps of the pyramids rising against the stars, and wondered how many more layers would have to be added before the converging lines met at a final point, and the whole could rise no higher. Did they wonder, looking at the colossal stone coffins they were building, why the pyramids were the only works that mattered in their day? But time is more than now, more than 12 o'clock, or any particular century. It is also ourselves. It is millions of people and many nations. It is the coolie whose water buffalo pulls a wooden plow through his master's rice paddy. It is the airman handing to a girl in Cairo one of the 2 silk stockings he remembers buying 36 hours earlier on St. Catherine Street. It is the scientist trying to harness God. Gaze up at the Empire State and the RCA building. Watch the Skymaster circle into LaGuardia with its bellyful of executives. See the shop girls staring at rubies and pearls reposing like a mogul's concubines in the window of Van Cleef and Arpels. The roar of the fight crowd in the garden. Look at the festoons of toilet paper descending upon the hero who makes his Roman progress up the avenue. See the greatest flash of them all shoot through cloud rings into the stratosphere. How near are you, then, to the end of the journey which the Puritans began more than 300 years ago, when they lost hope in themselves and decided to bet their lives on the things they could do, rather than on the men they were? Although time is millions of people and many nations, we say for the sake of convenience that this story begins in the innocent summer of 1938, when August heat brooded over the Middle West, and Germans crouched in Silesian fields with their steel helmets wreathed in sheaves of wheat, and old men everywhere fluttered their hands and looked at each other with frightened eyes. Part 1. In later years, Bruce Fraser often asked himself how it had happened that a woman he had taken for granted most of his life, had casually watched at work in her garden next door, should ultimately seem to him the embodiment of all that was essentially female. Easier to sense than to understand, durable, and possessed of a kind of private beauty he felt he alone could recognize. The time came when the thought of Lucy Cameron never failed to stir him. But no such thoughts were near the surface of his mind that August morning in 1938, as he stood on the porch of his father's house in Grenville, Ontario, and watched her trimming the edges of her patch of lawn. Bruce was young enough then to think that ideas were more important than people. And besides, those were still the days of innocence in a little town like Grenville, where Canada breathed out the last minutes of her long Victorian sleep. They were the days when the well-meaning generation everywhere, in college common rooms, in the pages of the rough paper magazines, in smoky apartments where beer drinking was a ritual and a symbol of the times, were still so excited by the novelty of knowing the score that they could spend delicious hours proving to themselves that life was a dirty trick. Measuring with logic and dialectic each year against its predecessor to prove how inevitable it was that the tide should keep flooding in. Now Italy, now Germany, now Spain, and soon the rest of us. Bruce thought about the book he had been reading the night before, a book so full of social significance it had drugged him into a state of perverse contentment. If all the famous men in the world, except a handful of Russians, were knaves, fools, or conspirators,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?